Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni-Viewer, and once again I got to see a preview so I could have a review out for opening day of a movie. This time, Marvel's Ant-Man. Now, Ant-Man has had sort of a tumultuous history as far as production goes of the film. I'm also kind of surprised that an Ant-Man movie even exists, to be honest. Mostly because Ant-Man is known for one thing in the comics, and only one thing. You bring him up in conversation with a really serious comic book fan, they will automatically say this as the defining trait of the character. And that is that Ant-Man, Hank Pym specifically, is the jerk who beats his wife. Now, of course, they are referring to the fact that he hit his wife once in a particular story, a story that really did everything it could to paint him as really, really bad. Which, that's haunted him ever since, as well it should. That's awful, but it's the one thing everybody knows him for. I mean, Iron Man, yeah, Tony Stark is an alcoholic. He's also a genius inventor, so those balance each other out. Ant-Man, he hits his wife. Can't come up with anything else. That's what everybody knows him for. So, he's not necessarily a character you would have expected to see get a film. And that and the fact that he doesn't really seem like he'd be all that useful as a superhero, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But also, of course, there's the production of the film itself, because Edgar Wright was originally supposed to be making this. He's been attached to this project for a very long time because he loves the character in spite of his flaws, or perhaps because of them, because that makes him interesting. I don't know. But he really wanted to make this movie, as you know, and once Marvel Studios finally got off the ground, it finally was moving forward, and then he and Marvel went separate ways. It just did not work out for some reason. I said nothing about it at the time. I didn't want to make any snap judgments about what could possibly have happened. We still don't really know all of the details. It's just that vague term, creative differences, whatever the heck that means. So, I may as well get it out of the way right now. What are my thoughts on how that happened, or what do I feel about it? I'm not surprised that it happened. It's unfortunate, but I'm really not surprised. Because, you see, there's no way it could have possibly worked. At least, not currently. Edgar Wright is very much an auteur-director. He's got his very own distinct style in just about every way imaginable that is entirely his own, and on the other side of that, you have Marvel, now a sub-company of Disney, that also has a very distinct vision that it wants to spread across multiple films to create a consistent product. So, of course those two are going to clash, and of course it's not going to work out unless a compromise can be reached, and unfortunately it seems that one was not reached. And before anyone goes off and tells me that Joss Whedon is also an auteur, and so is James Gunn and everything, I agree with you, but the difference is that those guys are auteurs more in their characterization, their writing, their dialogue. Edgar Wright brings a certain visual flair along with him as well, and that's not to say the movies by the others are bad or poorly shot. It's just that Edgar Wright has a visual style to his films that is distinctly Edgar Wright. So, had he stuck along with it, maybe it could have worked out quite well, or it would have resulted in a movie that was either too visually distinct and too different from everything else to feel like it was part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or it would have felt like a watered-down version of something that could have been great. Maybe it would have fallen into that sweet spot of everything working out perfectly. We'll never know now. But like I said, I'm really not surprised that Edgar Wright and Marvel wound up going their separate ways. It's unfortunate, like I said, but I'm not surprised. Maybe one day he'll come back to do another movie. Who knows? I mean, you got to remember, Edgar Wright's well known, but he doesn't have enough clout to get final say from the studio. He's not the iconic kind of auteur director just yet. If you had Steven Spielberg or Francis Ford Coppola or Ridley Scott come in and say they wanted to make a Marvel movie, which I'd actually really love to see Spielberg do a Marvel movie, but that's getting sidetracked. If they said they wanted to do a Marvel movie, they are auteur directors who have the clout to get final say on what a movie is like. Marvel would not mess with them. These are guys who have changed the course of cinema several times during each of their careers. So Edgar Wright is not quite there yet. So, like I said, unfortunate, but that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. But enough about that. On to the movie itself. Is it good? It is good. I'll get the negative stuff out of the way first. Like I said, the movie is good. It's not amazing. I was aware throughout the whole time that I wasn't feeling as blown away by Ant-Man as I was by other Marvel movies. Like, especially with Phase 2, I've really, really been enjoying them. Like, Avengers Age of Ultron, I left the theater feeling really excited and pumped because it was just so action-packed and cool and energetic. When I left Captain America Civil War and Iron Man 3, my mind was blown at what game changers they were and how could they possibly move forward from here, and I'm so interested to see what happens next. Guardians of the Galaxy, I was grinning ear to ear when I left that movie because it was just so hilarious and so fun and so visually amazing, so unlike anything else in the theaters at that point. And when I was watching Ant-Man, and when I left the theater, I just thought, yeah, that was a pretty good movie. I wasn't necessarily as thrilled by it. I wasn't bored by any means. Like I said, it's still a good movie, but the fact that I was aware the whole time that I wasn't being astonished by it, that has to count as kind of a strike against it, because that does mean ultimately it is a weaker film than the other ones we've seen. And again, I emphasize, not a bad film. Far from a bad film, in fact. I mean, I liked it enough to get the poster, as you can see. It's a heck of a poster, isn't it? The money went to, it's something the theater does where they donate the money you use on the poster to muscular sclerosis. Yeah, that's beside the point. So I liked the movie. I didn't love it. And I have a feeling a lot of people will be saying that as well. I might be wrong, though. The character of Yellow Jacket, the villain, or as he is, his actual name is Darren Cross. His hero name's the Yellow Jacket. He's played by, this is another reason I have the poster here. So, Corey Stoll. He is, well, you know by now the Marvel Cinematic Universe doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to the villains. Loki so far has been the only one that has stuck around that is a great villain for those characters. Ultron is also a really good one, but spoiler alert, he's not going to be coming up anytime soon again. And Kingpin is also really good, but he's on the Netflix series, and I know not everyone has Netflix, so yeah, that's what happens when Spider-Man takes all of the good villains with him. You're left with characters that are harder to get across. So, of course, you have the villain in this one, Yellow Jacket. It's, once again, a good performance, but it's still not quite. The closest I can compare it to is Obadiah Stane / Ironmonger from the very first Iron Man. Almost exactly the same. Business character trying to get one over on the inventor hero with his own version of a great invention, and he's evil, and there's a fight at the end. That's really not much of a spoiler, really. So it's a good performance. I want to say that it's a good performance. It's teetering on the realm of cartoonishly evil, but doesn't quite go over the top. And the Stahl is clearly having fun with it. But yeah, he's Yellow Jacket is not going to be joining the ranks of the great Marvel villains anytime soon, I'm sad to say. And there are a few issues when it comes to the writing. Now, the biggest flaw the script has is telegraphing. Not just foreshadowing, like actually telegraphing. I was, once again, aware the whole time when they were setting something up that was going to play out later. I'm the sort of guy who, when I'm watching a really good movie or reading a really good book, I'll narrow that down. I can get so wrapped up in a well-told story that I can actually forget if they've set something up and be astonished when it comes back. If it's well done, that can happen. In Ant-Man, it felt a little too obvious when they were setting stuff up. And there were, on a similar note, there were a couple of times where the more personal, emotional conflict seemed to resolve in ways that felt a little contrived. Just a little. It's not that they were bad, again, but these are definite flaws. So that is kind of those are three pretty significant but not crippling strikes against the movie. And I've gotten that stuff out of the way now. Negatives are gone. Was the movie good? Let's see if the positives can outweigh it. Now, the primary thing that Marvel was trying to do in Phase 2 was to branch out genre-wise. Because they didn't want to just do superhero movies in the traditional sense over and over and over again. They wanted to try and stretch the limits. So you had Iron Man 3 was sort of a war satire. Like it was deliberately parodying the War on Terror almost. Captain America the Winter Soldier was a political thriller. What am I forgetting? Guardians of the Galaxy was an irreverent space opera, and Thor the Dark World was more into the realm of high fantasy. So, this, Ant-Man, is a heist movie. That was the primary draw to it, that it was a heist film in the vein of Ocean's 11. And I think that was actually the perfect route to go. Like I said earlier, Ant-Man's powers don't necessarily seem like they come in handy very much in a big-scale superhero fight. He's not gonna do much against the Hulk, unless they bring in the Giant Man persona, which I doubt they're gonna do anytime soon. He can shrink, which is good for espionage, but not much else, even if he does have strength at that point. And he can control ants, which, step on them, they're done. So you can't really go a more traditional superhero route with him. So a heist movie, that makes sense. You can use the ants and the shrinking power to infiltrate stuff. And that's a great idea. That is an idea that I really am glad they did. So it plays out quite well, the way it works. It hits all the right notes. Like I said, it's got its problems, but they do some pretty interesting stuff with the fact that they've got a guy who can shrink, and he can control an army of really incredible insects when you get right down to it. I mean, ants are strong comparative to their size. So yeah, they definitely pulled that off quite well. And of course, there's the visual aspect, which is to say, you've got a hero who's this big, and he's existing in the world that we know, just experiencing it on a completely different scale. And again, Edgar Wright's version probably would have been crazy and very interesting to look at. This movie still gets it right. It's definitely not Edgar Wright style, but only Edgar Wright can do Edgar Wright style. This movie, the director who took over, hang on a minute, I don't want to make it sound like I don't care who he is. This one was directed by Peyton Reed. So, Peyton Reed's version of it, it's still really good. He really nailed it. They've got such cool scenes. I think I remember reading at one point that they filmed the actual locations the same way that they film nature documentaries about insects, where you get that huge scale. And of course, seeing that on a big screen with a tiny little human protagonist running through it, that's really cool. Obviously, it's not all shot that way. There's CGI. But they do some really cool stuff with it, and they get some great angles, some really dynamic shots. And surprisingly, the fight scenes work quite well with Scott Lang, because he is the Ant-Man. Spoiler alert, the Lego set did not spoil anything. Hank Pym does not don the suit at the finale. That's really the only spoiler that I can give you. They do some pretty creative stuff with him in the suit. How he's zipping around as really tiny, and then suddenly he'll pop up really big and deck you, and then he'll shrink again. And I don't want to... Like I said, I just did a minor spoiler there. I don't want to spoil any of the action set pieces, but they make full use of it. They make full use of the size thing. They make full use of the ant aspect. Like, the ants actually play a pretty big role. And for as ridiculous as the concept might sound, they sell it. What else? The performances. The performances are good. Paul Rudd makes a good Scott Lang. He's clearly into the role. Evangeline Lilly plays Hope Van Dyne, who is the daughter of Hank and Janet. I won't say how Janet factors in, because that is a spoiler. She's a really good character, and they're setting her up to have a more active role. She's pretty active in this one. She's somewhere between Pepper Potts and Lady Sif when it comes to how active she is in this movie. And they're setting it up so that she'll be as active as Black Widow when she next shows up. And again, that's all I'm going to say. But she also is a great character. She has some interesting moments with both Scott and Hank. Speaking of whom, of course, Michael Douglas as Hank Pym. Once again, that's a sort of role... Marvel has been doing a lot of roles where they take an older seasoned older seasoned actor that you wouldn't expect to see in a comic book movie and casting them in a comic book movie. And you've generally had two different classes of how that plays out. On the one hand, you have the people who really get into it and really bring their A game. Robert Redford in Winter Soldier. He brought his A game. Ben Kingsley in Iron Man 3. He was clearly having fun in some capacity, and he was basically satirizing how his career basically has got him cast as ridiculous over-the-top villains. It's a weird, layered thing that deserves its own conversation. So you have people like that, but on the other hand, you've got the people who just don't seem to give a darn. Glenn Close as Nova Prime in Guardians of the Galaxy. She has basically said in interviews that was just a paycheck to her. Anthony Hopkins as Odin. he's still giving a good performance, but I've seen enough Anthony Hopkins roles to know when he's phoning it in. He is phoning it in as Odin. Yeah, there are plenty of scenes where he just looks bored. So anyway, Michael Douglas. He falls into the former category. He clearly is. If he is phoning it in, it's not obvious. He brings it as Hank Pym. He's got some great scenes. He's taking it seriously. Yeah, he was definitely a good choice. So, and like I said, even though Corey Stoll's character isn't the best developed, I will say this. There are very strong hints that his character could have been so much stronger. There are elements there, like, there must be deleted scenes. But he's still giving a great performance. He is owning that role. And the side characters who are Scott Lang's associates from his life of crime, they are one-note archetypes. I will be perfectly honest. They are not fleshed out characters by any means. They are comic relief. But they still add something. They contribute to the plot. They are genuinely funny. They are worthwhile additions. I'm glad they are there. I'm curious to see if they stick around for all the future films. What else? I guess I don't really have all that much else to say. Like I said, Ant-Man is a good film. Not amazing. Not the greatest of the Marvel films. It'll probably come to be viewed as the weakest of the Phase 2 films, but that's not to say that it's awful. Weak, by comparison, in this particular franchise, is still very good. So, I would say go see it, because especially, I almost forgot, there is something else good that I want to say. Worldbuilding. This movie actually does a lot of world building. Because Hank Pym was clearly Ant-Man in the past. I won't say too much about that, but there's enough material there that they could do a prequel, basically. And there's stuff that ties into the Avengers, but it doesn't feel forced. You remember how in Phase 1 of these movies that the Avengers setup felt kind of forced? How it intruded on Thor and Captain America, and that, like, some of the movies didn't feel like they were allowed to stand on their own and had to have this stuff forced in. Here, it feels natural. They know what they're doing now. There's a set piece that deliberately ties into it all. There's a hint at a certain other creepy crawly themed character towards the end, and there are 2 post-credit scenes, one of which directly ties into an upcoming film. So, yeah, that's another thing it did quite well. Otherwise, like I said, Ant-Man is a good film. It's not great, it's not awful. I'd still recommend seeing it. But I was not as thrilled by it as I have been by the other Marvel movies so far. And again, that's not to say it's awful. I still liked it. I don't love it, but I like it. And I guess that's pretty much it. What did you think? I'm curious. So once you've seen it, leave a comment or make your own video, and we can get a discussion started. So, until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni-Viewer signing off.